Hey y'all, it's Rick here with Uncommon Communion. And yes, you guessed it, I am recording another video instead of writing for Wednesday. And regular viewers will also have guessed why. Well, it's Andor. I am hooked. And I'll tell you what, y'all, it is significant for our times. And I'll share a little bit more about that after we do as we always do here. We begin by remembering, recalling, celebrating, and upholding and affirming that we are always and everywhere in the holy presence of God, the more, and each other. So, yes, I had every intention this evening when I came home from Whole Heart Tuesday. As I've talked about here before, it is a little church based gathering at a really cool local coffee shop that we have. Well, when I came home, had dinner, I had every intention of watching just one episode of Endor, which would have given me time to come up, do a proper writing, and get on with my evening. But the episode that I watched was episode 9, and that was the end of the three episode arc, right? I think I've talked about that here before, how they've been doing all season 3 episodes that tell kind of a single story before moving on to the next piece of the story, right? And I watched episode 9, which wrapped up the story about the aftermath of an uprising on a planet. And I talked about that, I think, in the last Substack that I made for Tuesday. And I saw that. I saw how that resolved. And as always, there are cliffhangers, and I needed to see what came next. And I was glad I did, because the series is accelerating as we are seeing what the empire and the oppression and the fascism looks like. And it is really quite stark and quite telling for our times. One of the things I like to do when I watch these prestige shows is listen to podcasts, even if I'm listening to them a little bit after the fact. Yes, I am a little bit late to the Andor fan bus. It did play, 2023, I think, and then earlier this year, in the springtime of this year. And I am just getting around to finishing the first season, and now almost done with the second season. So the podcasts have been out for a few months. But what I'd like to do, as I said, is listen to podcasts on episodes that I watch. So I'll watch an episode, listen to a podcast, and feel like I'm part of a conversation, because that's what I think some of the best podcasts are on shows and movies and so forth. And one of the things that the hosts of this podcast mentioned, and I think this is so very true, is how political Star Wars has always been, right? The first Star Wars came out in the aftermath of the US participation in Vietnam, right? First Star Wars came out in 77, and, Vietnam had been over for a couple of years, but, it was very much still in the aftermath. So there was an allegorical sense of much of the war and fascist perspective. Fast forward to the prequel trilogy, which came out in the early aughts. And that was happening during the Iraq conflicts. So again, you had this background of, action happening in the Star Wars universe, a galaxy far, far away, of course, at mirroring what is going on in the United States and the world vis-a-vis war. Now, that doesn't exactly hold true for the sequel trilogy, which are the most recent full-length feature films that came out. They are a bit of anomalies, and many Star Wars fans would say they're kind of odd ducks, and perhaps not even really that necessary. Clearly now, the creator of this Andor series is, especially now in the second season, as the season was coming together before Trump had fully risen again, but it was clear that Trump could rise again. You know, when these shows were being produced, it was probably right around the election, maybe a little bit after the election, a little bit before the election, you know, depending on how long the turnaround was. Because again, I think these shows aired in March and April of this year. So again, the director is very, very clearly, the creator and his team are clearly showing what fascism does and what fascism looks like, and the cost of what it is, what it takes to resist fascism and to become a rebellion, to become an opposition, to fight the rise of evil that we see in a fascist government. And again, clearly we are seeing, you know, the rise of a fascist government today. You know, every single day it seems like there's something new that Rump, that Donald wants to do to undermine free and fair elections. You know, today or yesterday, maybe it was the mail-in ballots, that he wants to do away with mail-in ballots, right? And the gerrymandering, more states are, you know, bending over to try to appease him for that. And the National Guard sending from other places. I mean, it just every day, we're seeing this more and more. And again, Andor, I think for now, is a very inspiring, a very illustrative, and also, y'all, and I talked about this yesterday, it shows us what can happen, what does happen as a fascist state takes over, right? And, you know, it helps us have an imagination to imagine that it can happen here. You know, I mentioned yesterday that, you know, I think so many of us have had, myself especially, I'll be honest, have had failures of imagination, that certain things couldn't possibly happen, right? That a president couldn't possibly, you know, have an uprising like he did on January 6th and get off scot-free, have no consequences for that. Oh, and then once he was elected, oh, he wouldn't pardon all those people, especially people that beat and injured cops. Well, you know what? He did. And I think storytelling like in Andor can help us see that. It also, again, shows us the cost. Again, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but we see with humans, with relationships, that there is a cost, that personal relationships fracture and fray in the midst of war, you know, in the midst of wartime. I remember there's a song, I forget who the singer is. It's late and I'm not remembering it. Maybe I'll remember it before the end of this. But it's Bruce Cockburn is what it is. There you go. I remembered. It's a song called Lovers in a Dangerous Time. And maybe I'll feature that when I do plan to write tomorrow. But yeah, what a significant statement. And Andor shows that. You know, one of the characters has to leave to break a relationship so the other is free to do what they are really called to do. And that is a very painful thing to see. And yet it is a very true and real thing as well. I want to wrap up on a slightly different note. Whole Heart Thursday or Tuesday was what we had tonight. I think I mentioned before we talk about 4-letter words, and this evening we talked about play and the importance of play. And again, I think in the midst of what is going on nationally and what we are called, I think, to do to address that and counter that, we still need to play. We still need to relax. We still need each other. We still need to laugh and have a sense of levity, because that is what nourishes us. That is what connects us. That is what feeds us. That's what keeps us human, y'all. Because, you know, if you look at fascism, and Andor shows this very clearly, it's all black and white. It's colorless. It's flat. It's humorless, right? And again, when you look at what we are dealing with in the MAGAites is a sense of cruelty, yes, and a sense of cruel, quote unquote, humor, but there's no levity, there's no playfulness, there's nothing that is, I would argue, fundamentally what makes us human. So I'm glad for the contrast today, the play theme of Whole Heart Tuesday and the hard reality, the look at what fascism does and what is required of all of us to counter that. All right, I want to end with a prayer, something I heard at the beginning of today, and it is from the Centering Prayer book that I quote from frequently. And here is the prayer, and it's a very topical prayer for this time of year. Beloved one, bless all students returning to school. Bless all teachers, especially my wife, Erin, returning to teach. Bless all leaders returning to lead. Bless all workers returning to labor. Bless all beggars returning for more. Bless all hearts returning to you in surrender. Remind us all that your gift of grace takes us all the way home. Well, thank you all for listening. I am almost done with Andor. When I am done, I am not going to pick up another show. I'm going to continue to get back to my rhythm of writing and offering that to you. Again, I hope you have a great Wednesday. Blessing and good. Be gentle. Be well.